systems management. I ran a landscaping company in San Francisco for 2 years when I was living out there, and I used to work in New York City. And when I was in San Francisco, I started getting introduced to folks about gray water and rainwater and one of the things I like to start off with, I did a rainwater talk here over the summer, and one of the things I stressed then and want to stress again is to start out with the less fun stuff of kind of why this is really important, because the reasons on the East Coast for me were really different than the reasons on the West Coast. And we'll go through that quickly because I feel like there's a lot more technical aspects of gray water that I definitely want to get to, but I do think it's important to kind of just talk about, like, you know, position us in New York City and why, because we don't have droughts. We might have a drought compared to California. We might have like a drought in the summer, or we might have less water, but overall in terms of like the actual amount of water, New York City's reservoir isn't, like, the Catskills aren't going to run out anytime soon. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't waste the resource at all, but it does mean that you're looking at different conditions, and that space, especially in this urban resource, is really different. That being said, that's much more for private homes. When you're looking at large institutions or things that have turf or grass or large plantings, outdoor irrigation makes up for the bulk majority of water usage. And what people water is also the problem, so we'll talk a little bit about plantings, because lawns are a pretty major issue, and if you guys have more specific planting questions, I can try to get back. I've been in California for a while, so I'll try to peel back my West Coast and remember some of the natives out here. So that's what I'm going to start off just going through. There we go. This is from the last. This lends us to where we are right now, and I think it's just really important to kind of, when I went to my first gray water talk like 5 or 6 years ago, it was in California, and someone asked the entire lecture if we knew where our water came from, and it was surprising that most of us didn't, and I thought that was really strange, and that's kind of how I start off every talk. And this will obviously go back to what Chris was saying about natural gas, and what I do too. If you want to talk about that, I'll probably keep referencing it because it's important. So New York City, here, we get our water from 2 main places: east of the Hudson, the Croton watershed, and west of the Hudson, the Catskill Delaware rivers. It's a very large watershed. There are the delivery system is amazing. We get 1.4 billion gallons of water every single day. That's kind of, if you think about that it can generate, and that we have these 2 large tunnels, tunnel number 1 and tunnel number 2, that all just bring it to New York City. They're just massive tunnels that were dug around the turn of the century. And I think that's kind of an important fact, because, like I was saying, in California, the reason that people use water is because they're actually, they have ordinances where you can't water your lawn, you can't water your plants, and all of Berkeley and Oakland, it's voluntary, but you're not supposed to. And in New York City, we don't really have that, and we have this kind of our water rates are incredibly cheap, and it comes down to New York City, but we do have our own problem. We'll get into that. So when we live in houses, there are basically 2 major ways to treat wastewater, and one of them, and this isn't just gray water, it's black water, all wastewater, is individual or septic tanks. And this is just a breakdown. You'll see the lines. A septic tank is sort of similar to some ecological composting toilets, but basically it's dug under the ground, it has a bunch of chemicals, and without air or anaerobically, the soil or the contaminants is broken down, and then it's leached out into a drainage field. And that's kind of a bad picture. So this wasn't always the case. Basically, the way that New York City's history before we had the toilet was that the way that our sewage system works is it was actually a rainwater system, and that it was only sized to deal with flooding in the streets. And that was basically how New York City and all European cities were built. All of the sewage lines that we have right now are actually just stormwater drains. And then people started to make the connections that people were getting sick, and this is because we were just throwing our contaminated waste into the streets, that they started flushing it. And where this kind of comes into play is that everything goes down that drain. Your stormwater goes down that drain in New York City. It's a combined stormwater system. Your sink water, your shower, your laundry, your toilet, everything goes through that one pipe that was originally sized back in the day to just deal with stormwater. And so now we have this whole other problem, I'll come back to that, called combined sewage overflows. And so what happens is you have your wastewater lines from your toilets, your sink, and your showers, and then your stormwater drains, and this fills up. And usually it goes straight to the wastewater treatment plant over here. But when it rains, it overwhelms the system, and the system can't process it as quickly. So there's actually literally a lever that flips. And in stormwater events, it flips, and then everything flows out here. That includes your toilet water, your shower water, your sink water, water that's been running on the street, and it all outflows. And that's obviously a really huge problem. New York Times did a great story about that, and you can still find it, the Toxic Water series. And what was it?
Is that November 09?
Yeah, that's when they did the sewers, but this has been going on since we converted the sewers, so you're looking at the turn of the 20th century. So we've been dumping out an incredible amount of sewage.
And if you want to actually see some of these little holes where the stuff comes out, you can just go down to the Gowanus Canal. There's holes,
So
CSO holes.
there's 490 sewage overflow points just within the New York City area. And it's kind of something that no one really talks about, and that's why I think it's really important to kick this off. And it's an incredible amount. So whenever I didn't know this, but have you ever gone to a beach and seen the warning signs, don't swim? That's because it rained within the past couple of days, and that's because it's overflowed. So you're actually dealing with that. So basically this happens when we accumulate about an inch of rain, which, as you can imagine, in New York City happens a lot. 27 billion gallons of combined sewage overflows are discharged into the city's water every single year. That's kind of insane. So that's where gray water for me and rainwater comes in, because we're not dealing with drought conditions, but we do have this combined sewage overflow. So if you can divert any of this water in New York City away from that, you're cutting down the amount of sewage, and it kind of makes sense. Like if you think about it, it's waste. The way that we handle waste as a society, and I'll get into this later when we talk about ecological sanitation, is we take this thing, human fecal matter, and we think of it as a contaminated thing. And so what we did with it is we're going to dilute it, make it even bigger, put clean, potable water in with it, and we're going to dump it with all these other water, and you're going to have to deal with it. So we kind of just like made our mess bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger around us. And it doesn't really work. And gray water is kind of getting back at the principle of, instead of treating this, it's annoying, instead of treating this as a problem, what if we actually started using this as a resource? And what if we started using the nutrients that you get from your shower, from your sink, and recycling that water back in? And that, as part of a larger thing, is called ecological sanitation. And I'm going to switch down here. So, what is ecological sanitation? Ecological sanitation involves both composting toilets, drain water, and rainwater. And the thing with this system is you can sign on to part of it or the whole thing. It kind of depends on your comfort level and your property. And also, we'll get into this later, but the laws and how willing you are to comply or break them based on how you feel about your own land. Sorry about this going away, but what this says is that we have all these nutrients, and what we do is we make a big problem out of it. Our rainwater becomes a problem when it hits the pavement and it picks up discharge from our cars, our paints, our factories, our wrappers, our pets' fecal matter. Anything that you see on the sidewalk, basically that's usually rinsed either directly into a stormwater drain, or then we have to treat it. The other thing that we do is that gray water, even like urine, is actually really high in nitrogen, and if you dilute it, you can use that as a fertilizer. It's the same thing that our factories produce with chemicals using lots of fossil fuels. It's the same basic chemical component. There are better ways to deal with it. I'm not suggesting that everyone keeps just like a bucket in their bathroom. We live in a society that doesn't really work so well, but there are ways to do it and have it be cute and have it smell nice and have it be a good design. So ecological sanitation is basically an integrated strategy to manage human waste based on traditional knowledge, which relies on natural processes to transform human waste into fertile soil. And the big key is that we're looking at traditional knowledge. There's a great quote that it's like we're on the cutting edge of 10,000-year-old technology. And I think that that's really important. People have been harvesting rainwater forever. People have been using like excrement. I mean, that's what compost is. We just don't like to put ourselves in the mix. And so I think it's really important to keep back and remember that, as this has been going on for a long time. And the problem is when you have too many people in too small of an area and you don't go through the natural, actual like passed on tradition of how to safely compost.